For nearly 50 years, the death of Bruce Lee baffled fans and doctors alike. Was it Equagesic, a painkiller, a heat stroke, or something darker? But now, new medical research points to a tragic and preventable cause: hyponatraemia, water poisoning. Bruce reportedly drank 6 to 8 liters daily, overwhelmed his kidneys, and suffered fatal brain swelling. Combined with heat, drug use, and sweat gland removal, his body collapsed under stress. The truth? No conspiracy, just a perfect storm of choices. "Be water, my friend," he said. Ironically, it may have been water that killed him. The collapse, it was May 10th, 1973, and inside a small, sweltering studio in Kowloon, Hong Kong, Bruce Lee was working on post-production audio for Enter the Dragon. The process, known as ADR, or automated dialogue replacement, was grueling. As he performed line after line, his face turned pale and his voice began to slur. Then, without warning, Bruce collapsed to the floor. Seizures gripped his body. He was rushed to Baptist Hospital, where doctors diagnosed cerebral edema, a dangerous swelling of the brain. He recovered. But that moment marked the beginning of a decline he would never return from. On July 20th, 1973, just 71 days later, Bruce visited actress Betty Ting Pei at her home on Beacon Hill. He had a script meeting scheduled with producer Raymond Chow and wrapped up work by 4 p.m. Later that evening, he complained of a headache and took Equagesic, a painkiller composed of meprobamate and aspirin. He washed it down with water, lay down to rest, and never woke up. Betty called Chow in a panic. A doctor was summoned, but by the time Bruce arrived at Queen Elizabeth Hospital, he was unconscious, limp, and beyond saving. He was pronounced dead on arrival. The autopsy noted something chilling. Bruce Lee's brain weighed 1,575 grams, approximately 12.5% heavier than the average adult male's brain. The swelling was undeniable, extensive, and ultimately fatal. Forensic pathologist Donald Tier, flown in from the UK, cited death by misadventure, a legal term implying an unintended fatal outcome due to voluntary risk. His final ruling pointed to cerebral edema, likely caused by a reaction to the Equagesic. But the underlying truth remained unresolved. Why did a 32-year-old icon, at the peak of his power and fame, fall so quickly, so absolutely? As Tier himself put it, the evidence does not point to a clear poison or trauma. It points to the fragility of biology under pressure. That fragility, hidden beneath Bruce's legendary strength, would become the epicenter of decades of speculation. Bruce Lee's collapse was real, documented, and final. But the causes, those remained shadowy. The coroner named a drug reaction, but that didn't sit right with many. How could a man who embodied invincibility be felled by something as ordinary as a painkiller? To understand the full story, we must dissect the substance at the heart of the mystery: Equagesic. The Equagesic theory. The drug that may have killed Bruce Lee was not exotic or rare. It was Equagesic, a common medication in 1973 used to treat headaches and muscle pain. It combined aspirin, a widely used anti-inflammatory, with meprobamate, a mild tranquilizer. Bruce had taken it before without any apparent issue. But on that day in July, something changed. Pathologist Donald Tier concluded Bruce had suffered a hypersensitive reaction to the compound, an allergic storm that triggered lethal brain swelling. The official narrative was set. Equagesic had betrayed him. Bruce's wife, Linda Lee Cadwell, stood by the findings. At the 9-day inquest that followed his death, she repeated the same point. Bruce had no known illnesses, no history of neurological problems. She believed the allergic reaction was not only plausible, it was obvious. The doctors knew what they were looking for. The signs were clear, she told the Los Angeles Times in 1978. The public, however, wasn't so convinced. Critics pointed out that no markers of salicylate toxicity were found in Bruce's system. He'd used the drug multiple times. Why would it kill him now? The theory had gaps. Equagesic wasn't a strong enough substance to explain such a rapid and irreversible reaction in a healthy man. And if it were truly an allergy, why weren't there signs like hives, throat swelling, or cardiac arrest, hallmarks of anaphylaxis? None were found in Bruce's autopsy. The phrase death by misadventure cast a vague shadow, implying voluntary risk but no foul play. That legal ambiguity fed endless speculation. Was there a deeper cause, a confluence of stress, environment, or hidden illness that made Bruce more vulnerable than he appeared? One medical examiner put it bluntly: Equagesic may have been the trigger, but not the gun. If that's true, then something else, perhaps something systemic, had already set Bruce's body on edge, primed for collapse. Equagesic offered a simple answer, but it was too clean, too neat. Something didn't align. The legend of Bruce Lee couldn't end with an over-the-counter pill. Then, in the decades that followed, a new explanation emerged. One rooted not in medicine, but in heat stroke theory. In the blazing summer of 1973, Hong Kong was experiencing unrelenting humidity, with temperatures regularly exceeding 33 degrees, 91 degrees. Inside the dubbing room on May 10th, there was no air conditioning. Bruce Lee was sweating profusely, lips dry, pulse racing. That day, he collapsed. Many chalked it up to exhaustion, but Matthew Polly, a martial arts historian and biographer, later suggested something more ominous: heat stroke. Bruce, he argued, was no longer capable of regulating his internal temperature. Why? Because earlier that year, he had undergone axillary sweat gland removal surgery, a cosmetic procedure meant to reduce underarm perspiration on film. Sweating is one of the body's primary cooling mechanisms. Without it, the body overheats, especially under extreme physical stress, which Bruce constantly subjected himself to. Symptoms of heat exhaustion include dizziness, nausea, and confusion, all of which Bruce experienced on multiple occasions. If left untreated, heat exhaustion can escalate to heat stroke, causing cerebral edema, organ failure, and death. Polly noted, heat stroke is one of the most common killers of young, athletic men. Bruce Lee had all the risk factors and none of the safeguards. Bruce's intense workout routines, coupled with filming in confined, non-ventilated spaces, may have placed him in a perpetual state of overheating. According to reports, even his diet shifted towards liquid-based consumption, possibly as an effort to stay cool. But in doing so, he may have thrown his body's electrolyte balance off kilter, amplifying the risk of organ failure. His reliance on diuretics, combined with water-heavy meals and minimal sweat output, created a closed system, one that retained heat but couldn't dispel it. As Polly concluded, Bruce didn't die of a mysterious curse. He died because his body was telling him to stop, and he didn't listen. The signs were there, a first collapse, then another. But in Bruce's world, pushing past limits was the rule, not the exception. Heat stroke painted a new picture, one of a body pushed too far, too often. But even this theory left lingering questions. What if the answer wasn't just in what Bruce did, but in what he consumed? Specifically, the one thing he always told us to be: water. Hyponatraemia. By 2022, nearly 5 decades after Bruce Lee's death, a new theory entered the scientific arena, one that reframed his mantra into irony. A group of kidney specialists from Spain, publishing in the Clinical Kidney Journal, proposed that Bruce didn't die from drugs or heat. He died from hyponatremia, water intoxication. Simply put, Bruce drank too much water, too fast, overwhelming his body's ability to maintain a healthy sodium balance. His brain, like a sponge placed in a flood, swelled. That swelling became cerebral edema, his silent killer. The evidence was hidden in plain sight. Bruce had reportedly been following a liquid-only diet, consuming 6 to 8 liters per day of water and juice. He also smoked marijuana, a substance known to cause dry mouth and increase thirst. On top of that, he was using diuretics and aspirin, both of which impair kidney function and water regulation. The combination created a deadly cocktail. Without enough sodium in the bloodstream to retain balance, cells absorb excess water and swell. The brain, trapped in a rigid skull, has no room to expand. It pushes against bone and stops functioning. The authors of the study noted that Bruce's May 10th collapse bore the hallmark symptoms of mild hyponatremia: confusion, dizziness, slurred speech. It wasn't just exhaustion, it was the body's electrolyte network collapsing under the weight of excess hydration. The theory stunned the public. How could something as benign as water be fatal? But the science was sound. As the journal article phrased it, we propose that the kidney's inability to excrete excess fluid, not an allergy or injury, caused the cascade of events that led to Lee's death. And here lies the cruel twist. Bruce Lee's most quoted phrase, "Be water, my friend," was a meditation on adaptability, flow, and power. But taken literally, it may have been what undid him. The metaphor became the mechanism. If water was the match and heat the accelerant, then medicine may have been the spark. Bruce Lee's death, as it turns out, wasn't the product of a single blow, but a series of overlapping strikes. And in that complexity, a darker possibility emerged, one that asked not how Bruce died, but whether someone wanted him to. Blended triggers. Officially, Bruce Lee died from cerebral edema, triggered by an allergic reaction to Equagesic. But modern interpretations have begun to abandon the idea of a single cause. Instead, scientists and historians now propose a multi-hit model, overlapping physiological stresses that each eroded Bruce's ability to survive. One alone might have been survivable. Together, they formed a perfect storm. Heat stroke, water intoxication, and drug reaction weren't competing explanations. They were interlocking ones. Bruce's lifestyle in 1973 was a delicate balance of extremes. He had drastically reduced his body fat to below 6%, adopted a juice-heavy diet, and performed grueling workouts, often several per day. At the same time, he was taking medications like Equagesic, using marijuana, and recovering from surgical removal of sweat glands. Each of these choices, isolated, was manageable, but together they taxed the body's thermoregulation, hydration control, and neurological function beyond safe limits. The body's ability to compensate through sweating, urination, or electrolyte retention was slowly dismantled. This model explains the inconsistencies in previous theories. No signs of salicylate toxicity? That makes sense if Equagesic was just one of many contributing stressors. No external heat source at the moment of death? Heat sensitivity still matters if it primed the brain days or weeks before. No overt poisoning symptoms? That's expected if the cause wasn't poison, but systemic overload. Death doesn't always come with one name, said forensic expert Dr. Pedro Gracia. Sometimes it arrives wearing many masks, each subtle, each fatal. And that's the tragedy of Bruce Lee's final months. His extraordinary discipline, his pursuit of physical perfection, and his push against the limits of the human body didn't just fuel his legend. They also weakened the very systems that could have saved him. But as the science clarified, the noise only grew louder. Because for many fans, the truth wasn't satisfying. There had to be more. An enemy, a conspiracy, a dark secret. And that's where the rumors began to bloom, rumors and conspiracies. In the vacuum left by medical ambiguity, conspiracy theories rushed in like a tide. From the moment Bruce Lee was declared dead at Queen Elizabeth Hospital on July 20th, 1973, speculation turned sinister. Some whispered of a triad assassination, retaliation by Hong Kong's underground mafia. Others claimed he'd been poisoned over a dispute, or that his relationship with Betty Ting Pei had entangled him in a fatal love triangle. Asian tabloids circulated the idea of a family curse, intensified when Bruce's son, Brandon Lee, died in an on-set accident 20 years later, in 1993. At the center of many theories stood Raymond Chow, the producer of Enter the Dragon. Chow was the last person to see Bruce alive, aside from Betty. He delayed calling emergency services, some said, and tried to manage the narrative in the hours following Bruce's death. Was it damage control or something darker? Speculative reports hinted at cover-ups, pressured autopsies, and conflicting testimonies. There were too many inconsistencies, wrote journalist Lin Xingyu in 1974, to believe this was a simple case of bad luck. But most of these claims have long been debunked. Toxicology reports showed no foreign substances. There was no evidence of foul play, trauma, or intentional harm. Shannon Lee, Bruce's daughter, has spent years combating the flood of misinformation. These theories disrespect who he was, she told Fox News in 2020. They distract from his achievements and reduce his death to tabloid fiction. To her and to Linda Lee Cadwell, the truth wasn't scandalous. It was complex, and preventable. And therein lies the truth. Bruce wasn't murdered. He wasn't cursed. He was human. And therein lies the truth. Bruce wasn't murdered. He wasn't cursed. He was human, vulnerable to biology, stress, and decisions made under pressure. What killed him wasn't a villain in the shadows, but a confluence of risks that converged at the worst possible moment. Still, even amid rumor and fantasy, one thing has remained constant: the family's quiet resolve. Linda and Shannon never let the noise define Bruce's legacy. Instead, they turned to the facts and spoke, not to defend him from scandal, but to reclaim the man family responds. In the years following Bruce Lee's death, his family, particularly his wife Linda Lee Cadwell and daughter Shannon Lee, stepped into a strange role: protectors of a legacy under siege. From the day he died on July 20th, 1973, rumors swirled with relentless force, but Linda and Shannon refused to be swept away. In 1998, Linda penned a letter to the Los Angeles Times reaffirming her belief. In the coroner's ruling, Bruce died from a drug hypersensitivity, nothing more. There was no mystery, she wrote. There was tragedy. That is enough. Linda rejected claims about marijuana involvement, affairs, or organized crime, calling them theatrics for headlines. She had been with Bruce through his physical struggles, his back injury, his obsession with diet and form, his relentless training. She knew the man behind the myth. Shannon, meanwhile, took up the torch for a younger generation. In interviews and through the Bruce Lee Foundation, she worked to separate her father's legacy from the noise. He wasn't a victim of betrayal, she told Fox News in 2021. He was a man chasing truth, and that's what we should remember. Both women emphasized the role of Equagesic as medically supported, if tragic. They pointed to the 9-day inquest, to the international pathologists involved, to the lack of evidence supporting alternative theories. But even then, they acknowledged a deeper truth. Bruce's lifestyle was extreme. His choices came at a cost. He demanded everything from his body, Shannon once said, and sometimes the body breaks. Their public responses weren't just about setting the record straight. They were about preserving Bruce Lee as a pioneer of martial arts, cinema, and philosophy, not a cautionary tale of Hollywood excess. In their words, the silence after his death becomes human, grounded, and deeply personal. As the family closed the door on rumor, science quietly opened a new one. Across the globe, a group of researchers began combing through old records and medical reports, not to sensationalize, but to re-examine. What they found turned the story once more. New Science in November 2022, researchers from Madrid, Spain, published a controversial paper in the Clinical Kidney Journal. Their conclusion: Bruce Lee likely died of hyponatraemia, the result of excessive water intake. These were not journalists or fans. They were renal specialists trained in the precise biochemistry of water regulation and electrolyte balance. Their study wasn't speculative. It was forensic. Based on autopsy findings, witness statements, and Bruce's known lifestyle, they proposed a startling idea: water, not drugs, triggered the fatal brain swelling. The key lay in Bruce's altered physiology. He was reportedly consuming up to 8 liters per day of fluids, often in the form of juice, water, and broth. His diet was nearly devoid of solid food. Diuretics and aspirin, both known to impair water excretion, were in use. And then there was marijuana, which increases thirst while also dampening the body's sense of hydration limits. Combined, these factors overloaded his renal system, making it nearly impossible for his kidneys to expel the excess water. The Clinical Kidney Journal paper was not the first to mention water imbalance, but it was the first to synthesize all known factors into a coherent medical model. Bruce Lee had multiple vulnerabilities converging on a single fatal point, the researchers wrote. Their model didn't dismiss previous theories, it expanded them. Heat, medication, and fluid intake were no longer competing explanations. They were co-conspirators in a physiological ambush. The irony, once again, was unavoidable. Bruce's most iconic phrase, "Be water, my friend," took on new meaning. In embracing the metaphor, he may have overlooked the biological risk. As the Los Angeles Times noted in their 2022 coverage, the line between metaphor and mortality can be perilously thin. The science had sharpened the mystery into clarity, but it also brought urgency. Bruce Lee's death was no longer a historical footnote. It was a modern warning. What happened to him could happen again, especially to those who push their bodies past the brink. Lessons learned. Bruce Lee's story is not just cinematic, it's clinical. His death in 1973, while tragic, is now studied in medical schools and as a textbook case of how overlapping physiological stressors can lead to sudden death. One of the clearest lessons is the risk of hyponatremia. It's a condition often overlooked, particularly among athletes who are taught to hydrate constantly. But the truth is stark. When fluid intake exceeds the kidney's ability to excrete, even the fittest body can drown itself from within. This has happened before. In 2007, a woman died during a radio contest for who could drink the most water. Military recruits, marathon runners, and dancers have all succumbed to the same fate, and yet the condition remains underreported and misunderstood. Bruce Lee's case offers a high-profile example that brings visibility, and perhaps a measure of prevention. Hyponatremia isn't just about water, said nephrologist Dr. Maria Verdu. It's about balance. And when balance is lost, life can end quickly. Another lesson is the risk of heat stroke, especially in individuals who have impaired thermoregulation. Bruce's sweat gland removal, though minor on the surface, removed a vital cooling function. In a climate as hot and humid as Hong Kong, the ability to sweat is not cosmetic. It's life-saving. When combined with strenuous activity, medications, and dehydrating substances, the body's capacity to manage temperature becomes fragile. Bruce Lee's death, when stripped of myth, becomes a public health message. Don't dismiss the signs. Don't assume that physical strength is immunity. And don't underestimate how small variables, heat, hydration, medication, can interact in fatal ways. All this brings us to the most difficult truth of all, the truth that strips away legend, leaves no room for fantasy, and forces us to face mortality. Bruce Lee did not die a warrior's death. He died from a web of avoidable failures. The harsh truth, there is no final villain in Bruce Lee's story, no assassin in the shadows, no poisoner's vial. What we are left with is something far harder to accept. A man, brilliant and tireless, undone by the very edge he lived on. On July 20th, 1973, the world lost a star not to conspiracy or violence, but to a cascade of preventable medical errors. It was not glamorous. It was not cinematic. It was silent, internal, and irreversible. The phrase, "Be water, my friend," has been emblazoned on t-shirts, posters, and tattoos across the world. It symbolizes adaptability, grace, and control. But it also now holds a darker truth. Water can kill, not in rivers or oceans, but in bloodstreams. Bruce Lee's devotion to fluidity, to mastery over body and mind, became a metaphor turned literal. That metaphor, when stretched too far, met its tragic endpoint in a hospital corridor in Hong Kong. His story reminds us of something crucial. No one is invincible, not even Bruce Lee. Strength doesn't make us immune. Fame doesn't protect us from physiology. And philosophy, no matter how elegant, cannot override biology. He was human, extraordinary, but human still. His death doesn't tarnish his legacy, said Shannon Lee. It humanizes it. It makes him real. And perhaps that's the greatest legacy of all. Not the myth, not the muscle, but the reminder that behind every legend is a person, fragile and finite. In accepting Bruce's complexity, we honor him not as an icon trapped in perfection, but as a man who lived intensely and paid the ultimate price for pushing too far. Bruce Lee's life was a symphony of motion, fluid, explosive, unrelenting, but his death was a lesson in fragility. Beneath the myth of the dragon was a man so focused on transcending limits, he lost sight of the ones that mattered most. He was leaner than most athletes, faster than the camera could follow, and sharper than anyone before him. But even he could not outpace biology. The final truth is not cinematic. It is clinical, quiet, and avoidable. Bruce Lee didn't die from a sinister plot or a supernatural curse. He died from a multi-hit cascade, a blend of heat stroke, drug sensitivity, and hyponatremia. Each stressor on its own was survivable. Together, they formed a silent conspiracy of circumstance. The tragedy is not that Bruce died. We all do. The tragedy is how preventable it was, how water, his mantra, his metaphor, became his undoing. how the pursuit of peak performance turned into a biochemical tightrope, and how, in pushing to become more than human, Bruce forgot to protect the most human thing he had, his body. Yet in this complexity lies clarity. His death teaches us that strength is not immunity, that health is not just power, but balance, that even legends need limits. For fans, that truth can be hard to accept, but perhaps that's how we honor Bruce most. Not by immortalizing him, but by understanding him. Bruce Lee was not a myth. He was a man. A brilliant, relentless, vulnerable man who changed the world with his mind, his motion, and his message. And now, through science and reflection, we've come to see his ending not as a mystery, but a mirror, showing us the fine line between greatness and collapse. And perhaps that's what he meant all along. Be water, but know when to stop the flow.